It's Hollywood or history, unravel what they portray. Let's investigate, teaching truth, one frame at a time.
Welcome to the Hollywood or History Podcast, a podcast to help social studies teachers and teacher educators use film effectively in their classroom. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Roberts, and in each episode, we talk with a volume editor and lesson plan developer to determine the accuracy of their favorite films.
Hollywood or history, unravel what they portray. Let's investigate, teaching truth, one frame at a time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hollywood or History Podcast. This is the episode about our Simpsons volume, the 8th volume chronologically in the series. I'm here today with Dr. Annie Whitlock, Dr. Tim Constant, and classroom teacher Kymberli Wregglesworth. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you.
And for all the listeners, I must say we are a very Michigan-heavy podcast this final episode. All of my colleagues on the call are members of the MCSS board, Michigan Council for the Social Studies Board with me. I've known for many, many years now. And I'm super excited, especially after the last episode with all those Ohio people, to have some Michigan folks in my adopted state on with me. So I'm going to let you all do some introductions for the listeners. And we'll start off with Dr. Annie Whitlock. Go ahead, Annie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Annie Whitlock. I am an associate professor of history and social studies at Grand Valley State University in Western Michigan, just kind of west of Grand Rapids. I primarily teach PK3 social studies methods there, and I get to do a lot of research in elementary social studies and kind of like the best instructional tools to teach social studies to our very youngest learners. I am currently, actually, by the time this airs, I will not be the president of MCSS anymore. I will be the past president of the Michigan Council for the Social Studies, an organization that promotes social studies education across the state. And then I've been a member of since I was a middle school social studies teacher myself. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Thanks, Annie. It's good having you. Tim, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Tim Constant. I am the Director of Learning Services for Clarenceville School District in Livonia, Michigan. Prior to that position, I was a principal at elementary, middle, and high school, so all three levels. And then when I was in the classroom, I was a social studies and ELA teacher for 11 years before going into administration. I'm also a part-time lecturer for Eastern Michigan University. I teach 2 master's level research courses. So I really, really love that. That's really exciting. So I have multiple programs that feed into those 2 classes. And then I'm also a member of the Michigan Council for Social Studies Board of Directors. But also part of that is being the chair of the Michigan Social Studies Olympiad, which is really unique because it is the only social studies Olympiad in the country. So it's really, really unique. And we have over 20 different events and variety of events for students to participate in.
Excellent. And Tim, I didn't realize that you were also an educator for educational research. I also do that for my master's program. So one of these days we need to compare notes, and maybe there is a article in there at some point for us of teaching research
Maybe.
graduate students. So not a lot of work on that I know of. So yeah, definitely. Well, awesome. And last but certainly not least, we have Kymberli. Kymberli, if you don't mind telling us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Kymberli Wregglesworth. I am a high school social studies teacher at Onaway Secondary School in Onaway, Michigan. It's a tiny town in Northeast Michigan. Our town has a population of about 900 people. We graduate around 35 students a year. So we're a PK-12 building. So we've got preschoolers all the way up to seniors. I am also a newly adopted title of the academic advisor. We do not have a guidance counselor because of our size and budgetary constraints. So I'm actually in charge of our dual enrollment in our brand new early middle college program. So like I said before, we graduate around 35 kids a year. We've got right now 50 kids dual enrolled, and I think 10 or 11 in our first cohort for early middle college. So I'm excited about that. I am also a professor of practice with Reach University's teacher apprenticeship program. And so I am teaching social studies to potential elementary and middle school social studies or just educators in general, not really social studies educators.
Excellent. Well, it's good having you all. I must say, not to be biased, and this is like picking your favorite child, which I have none, so it's easier for me. But this is by far my favorite book in the series.
Yay!
Yes, I am. I have to say, I am not a fan of the TV show The Simpsons. But I remember having a conversation with Annie in Wilmington, North Carolina, for a conference when she brought
Yeah.
me the idea. And I was like, sure, why not? Sounds good to me. People do like The Simpsons. And even though I'm not going to talk about the lesson I wrote for the book, you've converted me in the sense of understanding how the satire is very funny. And again, I think just using The Simpsons to help teach different elements of social studies was a brilliant idea. And again, I'm so happy to have so many Michiganders from the board who contributed to this volume. And I think the readers, even though it's Michigan heavy, anywhere in the country or the world, if you're a fan of The Simpsons and you're a teacher, I think you'll find this book extremely valuable and to use in your own classroom and your own practice. So I'm excited to talk with you all about this topic. I will also tell the listeners and the viewers, if you've listened to every episode thus far, you know that we haven't had multiple lesson plan authors. We've had multiple editors for one book, but not the lesson plan authors. So how we're going to do it is I'm going to, when we get to the steps, I'm going to have Tim talk about, for example, step one, and then we'll move to Kymberli and she'll talk about her step one, and we'll go back and forth. But obviously, before we get to that, we should discuss why The Simpsons.
Yeah,
So,
why?
yeah. So, Andy, you have to like rehash that conversation we had, like, before COVID about the book,
Yes.
word for word.
Wasn't that
talking about-
over was
Yeah,
it
I think it
over
was
some, like, fried peanuts or what's the
the
boiled
boiled
peanuts?
peanuts. Yeah, yeah. Me being from the
Yeah.
American South and being in North Carolina, I made sure Annie tried boiled peanuts for the first
I'd
time.
never heard of this delicacy before,
Yes.
being from Michigan.
And
Yeah,
then,
so that was a
did you
great
like them?
conversation.
Did you like them, Annie?
I think I did. I don't remember.
Oh,
But
okay,
yeah,
yeah.
I
You
mean, I
don't
like
make,
peanuts in general, so
yeah, you don't want to make our fans in the South very upset with you because that is a staple
no,
of Southern cuisine.
nope,
But
I
anyhow, well,
won't.
great. Well, like I said, Annie, if you don't mind just talking about
Yeah.
how you came up with the idea of using the Simpsons to teach social studies.
Yeah, why The Simpsons? Well, I mean, if you know me in my personal life, this is not a stretch at all to know that I would write a book about The Simpsons. I am a massive fan of the show. I write in the introduction of the book that I was hooked from literally episode one when I was 8 years old. That's how long this show has been on the air and how long I've been a fan of it. And whenever anybody hears that I'm a fan of the show, or I would always hear like kind of anecdotally about teachers would say, "Oh, I use episode whatever to teach this and this concept in social studies." And I would always be like, "Man, I got to get a book together where I get all of these amazing lessons from the show. And then for work, I could just watch The Simpsons, and that would be like my job." And then, of course, over the boiled peanuts, Scott was like, "Well, we could do that totally if we make this part of Hollywood or history." So it's kind of fulfilling a publishing dream I've had. And yes, I did rewatch many episodes of The Simpsons to write lessons for this book. So why is just straight up because I'm a fan and because I, maybe I'm aging myself, but I do think people of were children in the 90s, let's just say, perhaps tended to use the clips like these in their classroom a lot. And so I did lean heavily on my Michigan friends to contribute chapters because many of them had told me, "Oh, yeah, we use this," but also lots of other submissions as well from fans, hardcore fans like me, but then also people who'd literally never seen the show, which I thought was pretty amazing that anyone would do that.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I was one of those people that never, I mean, I watched it when it was on early because I'm older than Annie and I remember it coming out. I also remember them banning Bart Simpson t-shirts in school
Yes.
because it said like, "Don't have a cow" or "Eat my shorts" or whatever he said.
Yep.
And now, nearly, 30 plus years later, we're actually bringing it back to the classroom where we can actually use it to teach social studies. So I find that to be, if that's the correct
Yeah, I
term,
mean,
ironic that this is
I know,
happening.
I
But
know. I
really
wasn't
great.
allowed to have my Eat My Shorts snap bracelet in the 4th grade, but yet, I can now designing a lesson that's using an episode to teach
Yeah,
4th
yeah. So
grade.
I think that's pretty awesome. So great. Well, that's good. That's awesome. And again, I do appreciate the fact that you brought this slice of pop culture to
Yeah.
the series. So again, can you just talk a little bit more, Annie? We already asked why The Simpsons, but can you talk more about how the book is broken up into not only looking at history, which is obviously the Hollywood history,
Right.
but the other disciplines in social studies as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I give you the personal reason why I wanted to write a book about The Simpsons because I'm a fan of the show. But really, since the show has been on for more than 30 years, it's now to the point where it's a historical artifact in and of itself. But because it's also still currently airing, then it's also very current at the same time. So it's this really unique piece to it. And The Simpsons has it became really clear that I couldn't just focus on history with this volume. I know I sort of cheated the Hollywood or history format a little bit. It's really like Hollywood or social studies because the show has taken on numerous social studies topics and with like oftentimes like satirizing the US public education system. So I had to kind of include pieces in that. And I try so I what I did was I organized the book by the NCSS themes of social studies. And then I added one as well. So it's not just history, it's also geography, civics, economics, technology, global issues, citizenship. So things that are bigger than just history, although historical elements obviously integrate with all of those different disciplines. And then because there were so many episodes that just satirized the education system in general, I added another bonus chapter about teacher education or learning about the education system in the United States. So really this book could be used since we designed elementary lessons all the way through college. This book can be used for PK 16 teachers basically. And so each chapter is divided up into one of the themes of social studies from NCSS. So there's 10 themes plus the one I added about the US education system. And then each chapter has two or three lessons that feature um, one or sometimes more episodes of The Simpsons. So some episodes use clips and they pull them from multiple episodes. Some lessons use whole episodes. Since they're 22 minutes long, they're not whole movies. It's possible that, to actually play a whole entire episode, although some of them go on tangents that aren't necessarily appropriate for PK 12 education. And then each chapter ends with a for further viewing section. And that is where I went through and found and kind of just do a quick run through list of other Simpsons episodes that could be used to teach that particular social studies theme. So if a teacher is inspired to use the Hollywood or history format, inspired by a particular theme or episode, they could kind of take something and run with it on their own to go beyond the book. So there are over 100 episodes of The Simpsons referenced in this book in some way. So even if they're not have don't have a lesson written about them by Tim or Kymberli or the other authors, they're in there. If that sounds like a lot, that's really actually kind of a small fraction of how many total episodes there are of The
Yeah, I was going
Simpsons.
to ask how do you have off the top of your head how many episodes there are now, or do you have a general idea for the listeners about how many? I know 30.
It's more than 700.
Okay.
I can tell you that much. And that was the challenge of the book. I could Google it too. The challenge of the book is that I couldn't keep saying like, oh, there's 700 and whatever episodes of The Simpsons because they're still on the air.
Yeah, they're,
So
they're
I
growing.
had to just say like more than 700. But Google tells me that there are 790. Okay, there's almost
Mm,
800
okay,
episodes of this.
pushing 800 now.
So
All right. Well, that's
almost 800 that have come
yeah,
up. So that's
yeah,
a lot.
that's a lot. That's a lot. So you have just a fraction to choose from, but 100 over 100 episodes seems like you have a good start for all my Simpsons fans out there that want to do a lesson about this TV show. The other thing I want to bring up and to reiterate for the audience is again, like Annie said, just like we use the term Hollywood. Not just movies, but TV shows, documentaries, cartoons, anything like that, YouTube clips, whatever. The history part is also a generic term for any social science, right? Geography,
Mhm.
economics, and you've heard in some of the past episodes, authors would stretch the idea of history to another discipline, and that just represents, we'll talk about in a few minutes, the fact based piece, where Hollywood is more of the fiction, if you will, based piece. And we do have books coming out where authors have even tackled English language arts topics, science topics, math topics, everything. So history is very, very loose. And again, we have a full book coming out about geography. So, and it still says Hollywood history, the geography edition. So just bear with us. A title is definitely a title. Well, thanks, Annie. I appreciate you talking more about why The Simpsons and your rationale behind it. But now I'm excited to talk to, again, not one, but two authors who wrote lesson plans in your book. And like I said, what we're going to do is we'll just go back and forth between Tim and Kymberli to let them talk about the different steps, again, of the Hollywood history process. But what I want to do first, like we've done with all of our other guests, is just have each of the authors talk a little bit about their episode selection and a summary about the episode, or in Tim's case, the episodes that they decided to use for their lesson plan. So without further ado, Tim, can you talk a little bit more about your episodes that you selected to be the basis of your lesson plan?
Yeah, absolutely. As Annie had mentioned, with 790 episodes, I think probably the most difficult part of the process was what episode or episodes to select. So when Annie was putting together this project, what really caught my eye is I really wanted to focus on economics because that was my favorite subject to teach in social studies. It's not a lot of people's favorite subjects, unfortunately, but I loved it because my very first master's degree was in economics. So it's been a passion of mine. So I said, Annie, sign me up for the economics portion of the book. So combing through so many episodes, two really stood out to me. An episode called Mr. Plow, where Homer ends up buying a snowplow truck and starts this business for snow removal. And then another one that really caught my eye was this episode called Super Franchise Me, where it's focusing on the idea of starting a franchise, purchasing a franchise and running a franchise. So Marge ends up with her cookies that are starting the sandwiches and so forth that are so popular that she gets approached by a company to be able to start this franchise. And so those two really, really stood out to me. Both of those focus a lot on the importance of competition. And so my chapter ends up focusing on, is competition good, right? So it focuses a lot on the perception, right? So perception of a business owner may say competition is not good, right? For the consumer, competition could be really, really good for a variety of reasons, right? So those were the two that really, really stood out to me.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. And Kymberli, can you talk about the episode selection and give a summary about what the episode was about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Annie asked me if I would do a civics lesson. That's kind of what I'm known for is my involvement in civic ed. So I really very quickly gravitated toward an episode called Das Bus. And so what happens in this episode, the Springfield Elementary Model UN team, which I'm like, what elementary school has a Model UN team? That's awesome. So including,
A fake one.
Bart, Lisa, Millhouse, kind of the whole gang. They are getting ready to go to Model UN competition, and they're on the bus on their way there, and the bus goes off a bridge into the ocean. And so that, of course, brings up questions about where the mythical Springfield is. And they wash up on this deserted island somewhere. And so you have all the kids, and now they have to figure out how they're going to survive until someone comes to rescue them. So the story itself, if you haven't figured out already, is based on William Golding's Lord of the Flies. And so a lot of shenanigans ensue where they are trying to figure out how to set up their government so that they can make it until they're finally rescued.
Excellent. And like I said, we will keep going back and forth as we go through the next part of the process. Just so again, for the listeners and viewers, as with every episode, Tim and Kymberli have been nice enough to provide all of their sources, their links, that kind of thing. So you'll have access to a PowerPoint in the show notes that will kind of guide you through both of these lessons. So, as you all know, hopefully by this point, of course, this may be your first time listening to Hollywood history because you love The Simpsons so much. We talk about the step-by-step process for the Hollywood or history strategy. And step one that we always talk about is the importance of choosing state and national standards to support the fact that you're using film or video in your classroom. We live in we'll just say it, CYA society when it comes to being a teacher. So sticking to those state standards is super important. And we really ask every author in the series to make sure that their lesson plans are based on state and, like Andy said, national standards, with the whole book being based on the 10 NCSS themes. So step one is selecting state and national standards that you think would work best with the film or the TV show that you decide. So we will start with Tim. Tim, can you talk a little bit more about the state and national standards that you selected to base your particular lesson?
Yeah, absolutely. Regarding the state standards, this was also really really challenging. Was I wanted to try to focus on three or four different states that had really specific, clear standards that was aligned to those two episodes. So Michigan being one, New York being another, and Ohio. And the standards in those three states really clearly laid out the importance of teaching things like entrepreneurship, teaching about market structures and the circular flow model, which is a main component of my chapter and of my lesson. And so in how does competition affect things like prices, the quality of the product or the service that you're providing, and how competition affects not only the businesses and business owners, but also us consumers. So those three states, and there was many other states as well, but those three states I really highlighted in my chapter because they had really really clear standards in their areas of economics that really connected well with the Mr. Plow and the Super Franchise Me episodes. But then also there was a lot of alignment to the Common Core state standards, right? So a lot of things regarding the writing component of my lesson, the reading component of the lesson. So there was a lot of alignment to those Common Core state standards in the area of English language arts as well. And then also I highlighted how those two episodes connect with the C3 framework, social studies framework. So especially looking at like cause and effect, looking at incentives and how incentives influence the choice of consumers, how incentives can influence the choice of business owners as well, but also the forces of competition. All of that is highlighted in the C3 framework. And so that's why I connected those specific components of the C3 framework to those two episodes. So there was also too looking at multiple sources, which is a part of the Hollywood or history process, right? Taking a look at your primary and secondary sources. That's another major component of the C3 framework as well. So a lot of alignment there with not only the state but national standards as well as the C3 framework.
Yeah, great. And just a note to the audience again, the Common Core, when we wrote this book, was very, very important and used. I think it was up to 41 states. Common Core has kind of gone down by the wayside a bit, but most of your English language arts standards, if you're from one of those 41 or so states, are based on the Common Core. So even though Common Core may be a little bit passe these days, certainly the remnants or the impact of the Common Core you can certainly find in your state English language arts standards. And we really want English language arts teachers to be able to use these lessons as well, especially at the elementary level, where we all know social studies may not be top of the charts when it comes to what teachers teach. And Andy has a whole bunch of information about that you can look up later on. But definitely, we want to include some of the English language arts standards to assist teachers as they go through the process. Well, great, Tim.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And Kymberli, let's talk a little bit about the state and national standards that you selected.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was not too difficult to choose a couple of states for the civic standards because Michigan, I know, teaching with those for several years, that we've got really good, strong civic education standards. And then I also know that Massachusetts and Virginia also have some really strong high school standards for civics. And so I kind of focused on some themes of the Enlightenment philosophers because there's going to be a focus on Thomas Hobbes and John Locke in my lesson. And then also on types of government. So, democracy versus monarchy versus republic, et cetera, et cetera. When it came to Common Core, like Tim, I looked for a lot that had to do with comparing of primary and secondary sources because those are both going to be used in the lesson. With the C3 framework, I was looking at some of the civic standards again that have to do with different levels of government, different types of government, as well as applying the skills that students are going to learn. And then lastly, some of the NCSS core themes, especially focusing on individuals, groups, and institutions, and then especially civic ideas and practices.
Thank you again for letting the audience know. And I don't know if y'all did this on purpose, but listeners do pay attention that we do have some red states, some blue states, and some purple states represented. So you can certainly use these lessons, hopefully, anywhere. So red states, blue states, purple states in each of these standard selections. Well, awesome. Well, let's move on to step two. Step two is develop an interesting question. The good thing about the whole book series is you have a compelling question. Hollywood or history or economics or civics. How accurate do we think these clips are based on this question? Is it 100% history, meaning everything about this film clip or this episode is based in fact? Is it 100% Hollywood, meaning nothing about this episode is accurate, or somewhere in between? But again, we also ask our authors to come up with additional compelling questions, perhaps, and certainly supporting questions for each of these lessons. So, Tim, can you talk a little bit more about your primary and your secondary questions that you wrote for your lesson?
Yeah, so my primary question goes back to is competition always good? And I think the key word there is always. Right. So that's a key word there. And a lot of that deals with perception. I had mentioned earlier regarding the perception of us consumers regarding competition versus the perception of business owners. Right. So my wife, as well as myself, we've been a small business owner in the past. My wife still owns a small business, right? And depends on the day. She'll say sometimes competition might not be good, right, for her. So, but that's the big question. And then some supporting questions that I had regarding that is what drives demand for a product or a service, right? And so on day one of my lesson, there's a hook or a sparking strategy that I have where I ask students to be able to think of like their favorite restaurant and what are the qualities regarding that restaurant that makes it their favorite restaurant, right? So that those qualities help to drive demand to that restaurant, right? And then they will share out with each other regarding what are those qualities, right? So what drives the demand for a product or service? And then that leads to another question of what are the benefits and what are the challenges of competition? So being able to identify what the benefits are in those challenges will help then lead to more of a discussion regarding is competition always good? And then getting an understanding of what is the relationship between households and businesses, which are two components of the circular flow model, right? So those interactions between households, which is the consumers, and businesses will help us to dive more into that compelling question of is competition always good?
Well, great. And knowing how hard the three of y'all work on your side hustles outside of your jobs makes me feel like should spend less time in the gym and the golf course. But that's neither here nor there. No side businesses for me. But congratulations. Well, great job, Tim. Thanks for letting us know your questions. And Kymberli, you're up. What were some of the interesting questions that you developed for the lesson plan?
Okay, so my primary question was what type of government best balances the protection of natural rights with law and order? And I think that this question is probably as old as human civilization because we have experimented all throughout history in different places, different time periods with different kinds of government. And some of them work for a short time, some of them work for a long time, some of them are allowed to be changed freely, some are enforced on people whether they like them or not. And so I think this is a really enduring, compelling question that honestly we're struggling with even now in 2025. Where is the balance between natural rights and law and order? So, out of that, kind of a couple of supporting questions. The first one: how much power should a government or a ruler have? And so, kind of making that determination. And again, that's one of those things that kind of ebbs and flows depending on what is going on in the world, what is going on in an individual country. That's going to change more or less depending. And then another connected question to that is who should choose? Who should choose the government? Who should choose the ruler? How should they choose that person? And these are really very important questions as well, thinking about specifically the development of the government in the United States. That was one of their big questions, the Constitutional Convention, for example. Who and how is going to determine what the government is going to be. So for students, they are really going to start to dig into ideas and concepts of state of nature and social contract, which is what my whole lesson is really based around.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. So moving on to step 3, as we talked about a bit already, is selecting your sources. So the basis of the Hollywood history strategy is you have students use primary and secondary sources to examine the film clip or the television show to determine how accurate they think it is using these sources and using evidence. So Tim, can you talk a little bit more about the sources that you selected for your lesson plan?
Yeah, I leaned heavily on the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve districts and the resources that they provide. So there's 12 Federal Reserve districts throughout the United States, and each one of them has an education arm to them. And so there was 3 of those Federal Reserve districts that had some really excellent resources regarding competition, entrepreneurship, those effects on market forces. And that was the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, Atlanta, and Chicago. And so, for example, one of those districts had a really great introductory video for students explaining the circular flow model and the reciprocal interactions between households and businesses and the product market and the resource market, and what are all of those forces in those interactions of those components. But also too, one of the districts had a really great resource for terminology, some of the specific terms that was in those 2 episodes, some that are terms that may not explicitly have been stated in those 2 episodes, but are really important for students to be able to know. So I highly recommend those educational resources from those districts. And those were the 3 Federal Reserve districts where I pulled a lot of sources from to be able to support this lesson.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And just aside, in a past life, I was a teaching American history grant director for my old school district, and our focus was on economics and history. And we use the Fed a lot, and they have some amazing resources for your students, whether you're doing a Simpsons lesson plan or any lesson plan involving economics. Well, great. Well, Kymberli, can you talk a little bit more about the sources that you selected for your lesson plan, please?
Absolutely. So the first source that I use is actually a secondary source, because this is a topic that's usually approached at the beginning of a civics course. Students don't have a lot of background information about social contract theory, state of nature, all of that. So I first have for them an article on social contract theory from Thousand Word Philosophy, which is really a great website that I have used pretty often for different things, that gives a very distilled explanation of a lot of different philosophical or government related enlightenment ideals. And it's written in language that students can really understand, which is helpful because then we're going to get into some much thicker resources, including an excerpt from Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, which, if you have ever read, it is written in a not old English, but an older English that is really intimidating to high school students. It's all the way back from the 1600s. There are things that are spelled kind of strange, not so strange that you can't really understand what they are, but it is a much, much thicker, more difficult reading for students. But the focus here really is on that state of nature. Hobbes's famous quote, of course, the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And I follow that up with another excerpt, this time from John Locke's two treatises of government, specifically the second treatise. And in this one, where he is also talking about state of nature, this state of liberty, where mankind comes to where there really aren't any rules or laws. But that also puts you in a dangerous situation because anyone bigger and stronger than you can come by and, as I tell my students, clunk you on the head and take your things. So the excerpt that I chose from Locke has to do with this idea of needing an established known law that the people agree to, and having an indifferent judge of that law to be able to make determinations about who is in the wrong and who is in the right.
Thanks for bringing these up, Kim. I think these are excellent resources. But just to note, we've said this in other podcasts before. If you are using primary sources or secondary sources where the language may or be a little bit more difficult for students to read, you can certainly put those sources in some sort of program that will make the reading level better. And that comes from Sam Weinberg. However, if you do that with these sources, especially primary, you need to make sure you have the actual source with it to keep that source a primary source so your students can read both versions of it, the actual source and then the adapted source, just to make sure, again, that you keep those primary sources primary sources. So definitely keep that in mind as a teacher tip. And again, I know I said this a lot before with the other podcast, not that you'd have a drinking game with an educational podcast, but if you do, there's a square for you. All right. So moving on to step 4, which is developing a graphic organizer. We've talked about every lesson in the book series has a standard graphic organizer that I developed a long time ago, where we really, have the different boxes where students are able to use that to help analyze the sources. You have a box for the primary source, a box for the secondary source, a box for the film clip or the television show, and then finally a box where they are actually able to discuss how accurate they think their film is, Hollywood or history. However, different authors have also included additional sources, or they've adapted that original source to meet the needs of their students when they develop the lesson plan. So, Tim, I think you have a different graphic organizer that you include in your lesson. Can you talk a little bit more about the one that you selected, please?
Yeah, I do. And it's the circular flow model, which is a really, really key graphic organizer in the field of economics. And so in my chapter, in my lesson, I ask the students to be able to complete this circular flow model graphic organizer for each one of the episodes. So for Mr. Plow and for Super Franchise Me. And the reason is that by interacting with that graphic organizer, they're going to be able to remember each one of those components a lot better than just memorizing the individual components. Because traditionally, we would put the graphic organizer that's already completed, and they would memorize it, right? So using the Federal Reserve District's resources, showing a quick video about the different components, which is households and businesses, product market, resource market, and then the arrows, the reciprocal arrows that go back and forth between those four major components. Interacting with that graphic organizer with each one of those episodes, they're going to be able to remember each one of those components a lot better. And then putting specific examples in from each one of those episodes of, all right, what is the product market? What is the resource market here? Right? What's the labor component to this? Where is the effects of competition? And then being able to compare and contrast what those two graphic organizers, one for each one of those episodes, looks like. And they'll be able to see some of the similarities and some of the differences between those two situations, where in Mr. Plow, it's more of a sole proprietorship, right? Versus in Super Franchise Me, it is a franchise style business, which is a completely different business model, right? So they'll be able to see some significant differences between those two. So they're also learning about some of the differences in the different types of business, from sole proprietorships to partnerships to corporations.
Great. And listeners, Tim did put a visual in the PowerPoint you'll have access to about the circular flow model. Kymberli, can you talk a little bit more? You also developed kind of your own graphic organizer. Can you talk more about the one that you developed?
I can. So I took the sort of original Hollywood history and adapted it a little bit just because of the format of my lesson made that necessary. So students will be introduced early on in the lesson to the ideas of state of nature and social contract, kind of get some definitions of those, talk about their own understanding of what those definitions mean. And then as they're going through the different sources, they're going to look for examples or explanations from the secondary source, and then also from the two primary sources of what state of nature is and what social contract is. And then after viewing the episode, they are also going to see, where are the examples of those two ideas in the episode of The Simpsons, where the kids are in the state of nature and where the kids put together their very proto-social contract. And finally, there is a fourth box at the bottom because the second part of the lesson actually has a hypothetical scenario, which really inspired me to use this episode because it was a hypothetical scenario that I had previously used in my classroom, and I thought that the two went really well together. So once the students do the hypothetical scenario, they can also identify state of nature and social contract in that activity.
Great. And again, Kymberli also put a visual of the graphic organizer that you'll be able to find in the PowerPoint. Okay, so after you have selected your standards, after you have found your primary and secondary sources, you actually now get to show the film. So to your students, or show in our case, the episode or clips from the episode. Tim, can you talk a little bit more about the particular clips that you selected from your two episodes for your lesson?
Yeah, as Annie had mentioned, there's a couple different approaches. You could, show the whole episode, or you could make the decision to show clips of an episode. So I made the decision for my two episodes is to show clips and to specifically identify why those specific clips. So I gave a start and end time for each one of those clips. So for example, in Mr. Plow, the very first clip is a really great example of entrepreneurship. What do we mean by entrepreneurship? Right. And then like clip 2 gets into talking about business opportunity. Like when an entrepreneur gets an idea and says, I think there's a business opportunity here, right? It's a really, really great example. And so each one of those clips is identified with a specific economic concept. So in Mr. Plow, there's examples of pricing. What do we mean by a service industry? What do we mean by rewards? What great examples. There's two clips that show really specific examples of the effects of competition, right? And getting back to that question of, is competition good or bad, right? But then also too, there's a clip in Mr. Plow towards the end of the episode that is a really great example of competitive advantage. What do we mean that a business has a competitive advantage over another business? And then finally, at the end, the Mr. Plow business, as well as the competition, they decide to work together. They decide to merge. So what a great example of leveraging resources and in merging together, right, to be able to make their individual businesses even stronger. So in my next episode in Super Franchise Me, same thing. I had 8 clips where I had identified start and end times, where some great examples of additional economic concepts, right? So the very first couple clips shows great examples of what do we mean by demand, right? So when you're teaching economics, you always hear that the root of teaching economics is about supply and demand, right? 2 great examples of what we mean by demand. But then clip 3 shows viewers a really great example of what do we mean by a franchise? What is a franchise style business, right? That's not often discussed in an economics class. So that was another reason why Super Franchise Me was a really interesting episode to be able to unpack and to be able to develop a lesson around. But other clips in Super Franchise Me talks about supply costs, labor shortages, labor issues, competition, competitive advantage. So that's the reason why I wanted to unpack those 2 episodes into clips, because there was really specific economic concepts that I think that are really important for students to know.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, so I think, Kymberli, you decided to show the entire episode. Can you talk a little bit more about your decision for showing the entire episode for your lesson plan?
I did. So every episode of The Simpsons, as we know, is only like 22-ish minutes long. So they're quite short. And the Lord of the Flies theme of the show probably is like 2/3 of that particular episode. There is another part where actually Homer decides to start his own internet business, even though he doesn't know anything about the internet. And just for continuity, it's almost easier just for me to run the entire episode than have to stop and fast forward and stop and fast forward. I might change that. My bell schedule at my school is changing. We're going to have shorter classes. So I may end up changing that and only watch the clips. But it's very easy to identify the clips that you should be watching, because it's either the clips with the kids or it's the clips with Homer. And so if you don't want to watch the clips with Homer, you can easily skip them. So after we have watched that episode, I would have a discussion with students about, when does state of nature in this episode begin? And give me some specific examples. What did you see that you thought helped to define that this was when state of nature started? Who takes charge to start a government? And do the other kids consent to that government? There's actually a couple of different governments that form during the episode, so they can have multiple different places. And whether or not it was successful. And obviously, if there's more than one of them was not successful. And then talk about, kind of steer them thinking about what kind of rights do the kids have? And, who might have more rights than someone else based on their brains, based on their brawn, based on their possession of having the cooler with the snacks inside. And then how do they protect their rights? How does their new formed government protect their rights? And kind of facilitate that discussion about all of those issues in order to get the students ready to analyze those primary sources, and then also go on to the hypothetical situation that comes later.
Yeah, perfect. And again, for the listeners, even though the lesson plans are very detailed, takes you through the process step by step, we certainly are not writing strict scripted curriculum. We don't want you to follow it step by step by step. We want you to adapt these lessons based on the needs of your own learners. So in this case, you may want to show the entire episodes of for Tim's lessons, and you may want to break up Kymberli's lessons into sections. It's up to you or clips. Again, we don't want this to be a scripted curriculum. We certainly want to give you enough detail for you to bring this to your classroom, but then it's up to you as a teacher to adapt as you see fit. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for talking about the different films you're showing. Now we go into step 6. And again, step 6 is when we start analyzing our primary and secondary sources. Tim and Kymberli have both talked about their sources in great detail previously, but is there anything else you want to add, Tim, about when you have your students read those sources you selected?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I didn't mention prior was one of the resources from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta is an infographic. And there's multiple parts to the infographic that they provide that is a really great resource for students to be able to check the work that they did when they're completing that circular flow model for Mr. Plow and then completing it for Super Franchise Me. That infographic is a really, really great resource for them to be able to not only check their work, but also to there's language in my lesson where they're able to partner up or group up and have some group discussions, and where they're going to be able to use that resource to be able to check each other's work as well. And so that was another resource that I wanted to highlight that was, I think, is the use of an infographic is something that is often underestimated as a resource to be able to use. And even creating infographics, there's a lot of software out there to be able to create infographics now for students. So I just wanted to highlight that source.
Great, thanks. And same thing, Kymberli, anything you want to add about those sources that you selected for our teacher listeners?
I don't think so. Only just that when we use the 1,000-word philosophy article, I usually read that to students and kind of stop and interpret as we're going through it, because as I mentioned, that's going to be a first exposure for many students to those concepts of state of nature and social contract. And then for the Hobbes and Locke excerpts, those I generally will put students in small groups, and that way they can kind of make sense of it together. And I will give it to them on paper with lots of space and tell them, write all over this, write your questions, really kind of talk to this text so that when we come back together as a full group, you'll have those questions, you'll have the things that you thought were important, and we can discuss and make meaning.
Great. Well, thank you. And Tim, we get to our next step where, again, we're just going to merge these together about analyzing our sources. You also wrote a little bit on the PowerPoint about step 7, analyzing the primary source. So is there anything you want to add to that discussion when it comes to this analysis of those primary sources that you found?
Yeah, absolutely. So at this step in my lesson, this is where there's a small group activity where the students are going to now start to synthesize the information, right? So this is a really important part of inquiry is that synthesis. So that's depth of knowledge for those that followed the pedagogical approaches of the levels of depth of knowledge. Synthesis is depth of knowledge 4. So looking at those questions regarding what's driving the demand for goods or services, what are the benefits and the challenges of competition? What did you learn about the interaction between households and businesses? Looking at those 2 graphic organizers, those completed circular flow models, one for each episode, and then trying to synthesize that together in having conversations in a small group format is really, really powerful. That's where that depth of knowledge is going to be established.
Great. And audience, don't forget, Tim was a principal, so he has assessment on his mind. No, I'm just kidding. It's very important. Obviously, every lesson plan should have a good assessment. And the one thing I like about Tim's lesson is they definitely have that assessment piece that will be useful to teachers when they do this lesson. So thanks for that, Tim. And we're gonna change it up just a bit. Kymberli, for her step 7, added a little bit of a wrinkle to what we've been talking about throughout the podcast. And she's already mentioned it before about a hypothetical scenario. So Kim, for your step 7, can you talk a little bit more about your hypothetical scenario that you used for your lesson?
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually pulls in another kind of, it's not really Hollywood or history, but I'm like, oh, you need to do books. Because this idea I had way back in the day. I'm a big fan of Stephen King, and I read Stephen King's book Under the Dome, which they made a TV series. The first season of the series was really good and it followed the book, and then the second season got really weird and went outside of the book, but that's neither here nor there. So my hypothetical scenario I call Under the Dome, and we're far enough away from it now that most students don't have any idea what it is. But there's always that one that's like, wasn't that a TV show? And so I give them the scenario, and I'll read through parts of it really quickly. I tell the students, imagine that 5 minutes before the school day ends, all of the adults in school disappear. Every student who has come to school today is here, but everyone who is not a student is mysteriously disappeared. Additionally, this dome-shaped force field has appeared around the school. You can see out, people outside can see in, but nobody can figure out how to get through it, and you're stuck. Your cell phone doesn't work, the internet doesn't work, which that makes them all really nervous. But the water in the sewer and, the heat, I always say heat still works. I know in some parts of the country it'd be more important for the AC. But we're in northern Michigan, so we're good with just heat. And they also have electricity. And in the lesson, I basically tell teachers, kids are going to have questions, and you're going to have a discussion about this scenario that they are trying to survive until either the dome disappears or someone can figure out how to get through and save them. And the kids are going to be like, well, what if this? What if this? What if that? You know what? Answer those questions however you like, and just make sure that you keep to the real basics of the scenario. So, there's no phones, there's no internet. Food is going to magically appear in the cafeteria every day, and it's going to be enough for everyone. But I always put this caveat because it gets kids thinking, if someone takes more than they need, that means someone else is going to have to do without. So I want to kind of create a limited resource situation for when they go on. So then I will put students into small groups and tell them, okay, figure it out. Figure out how you're going to survive until someone comes to save you, or the dome disappears, or you figure out how to get out of the dome on your own. Who knows? And so it's putting them in that Lord of the Flies situation. It's putting them in that deserted island situation without having to concoct a story as to how they get to a deserted island. I don't know where the dome came from either, but we got to do some fun stuff. So there's actually a whole set of questions kind of to guide students. You don't have to use them all. You can make up your own questions that you want them to have. But things like, what rights do you have? What are you going to do if someone violates your rights? How are you going to maintain order? How are you going to make sure everybody is alive at the end of this? What kind of rules are you going to have? How are you going to pick a leader? Who's going to enforce those rules? What happens if somebody breaks a rule once you've formed a government? What are you going to do with them? Like, are you going to lock them in the basement, or, what are you going to do? So to really get students thinking about being in a state of nature, and then how they come to a social contract to create a government that hopefully will preserve them and preserve their rights until the emergency situation is over.
Excellent. And like I said, we really want our authors for all the lessons in the volume, not just Nanny's book, just to really, stretch their imagination, bring some creative things to this process of Hollywood history. So, Kim, I really do appreciate you adding that element to the lesson plan to kind of, take away a bit from the standard, primary, secondary source analysis, how accurate, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a fun activity to just, enrich your students when they go through the process. So thank you for including that. So
Thank you.
no problem. So step 8 is the final Hollywood or history piece, where you have your students analyze the primary source, secondary source, and determine, using those sources, how accurate they think the TV show or the film clip is. Now, as I've said many, many times, when you do Hollywood history, you want your students to be able to do this, not you. You don't tell them if they are right or wrong, but they come up with how accurate they think the clip is using evidence themselves. We also have added to the podcast an element where we have our authors and our editors talk about the films or the TV shows under study, and they come up with their own conclusion using this continuum about how accurate they think their clips are. Now, we wait till the end because we don't want to bury the lead. So just to let you know, Tim and Kymberli, you're going to talk about how accurate you think your episode was when it comes to your primary and secondary sources. Annie, you're in charge of talking to us about the 800 episodes in The Simpsons and how accurately they did. No, I'm just kidding. You get to pick and choose because you wrote many lessons in this book as well. Just think about one of the lessons that you liked and talk about how accurate you think it is using the Hollywood or history continuum. But again, we'll do that towards the end of the episode. Okay, so again, step 8 and 9 is part of the conclusion piece. So we want to talk a little bit about the different conclusions that you made when it came to your lesson. And we're going to actually flip-flop it a bit because that's the way the PowerPoint works. So Kymberli, when it comes to developing a conclusion for your lesson plan, can you talk a little bit more about that conclusion piece that you have your students do when they complete the lesson?
Yeah, for sure. So after they have kind of sat together with that hypothetical scenario and have come up with their ideas, I have each group kind of report out to the class, and we talk about whether or not we think their system is going to work or not, and who has the best one, and who's we think is going to crash and burn and fail miserably, of course, because teenagers need that. And so then we actually kind of move into talking about the different formats of government. So as students will say, well, we're going to do XYZ in our scenario. We'll talk about, okay, well, then you have determined that you're going to have a monarchy, or you're going to have a dictatorship, or you're going to have a republic. And just to sort of introduce, again, this is a lesson that's going to happen very, very early in a civics course. So just to introduce those terms to them so they can get a better understanding of them. And the final kind of summative assessment that the students are going to do is to take all of these ideas from the secondary, the primary, the episode, the scenario, and tie all of that together into thinking about what kind of government do they think would be best suited to ensure everyone's survival while still protecting people's natural rights. So they really are at this point coming up with an answer to that original compelling question about what kind of government best protects our natural rights while keeping law and order. And so they're thinking about, did state of nature influence the choices that people have made over history in creating a government, and have all governments benefited from having a social contract, or do some forms of government not really worry about a social contract and just enforce on the people?
Excellent, thank you. And Tim, can you talk a little bit about the conclusion piece that you have for your lesson plan?
Yeah, for me, it is those small groups revisiting some of those clips, looking at the primary sources and secondary sources, and working together in those small groups to address that compelling question of, is competition good? And as you know, when you're addressing any kind of compelling question like that, there's no right or wrong answer. It's that the key is the learning is part of that process, is part of the conversation. And for them also backing up what their group's decision is, right? And then giving them, those small groups, the opportunity to listen to each other, but then to also provide some space and some time for them to be able to develop a counter argument, and then to develop a rebuttal to that counter argument. So providing that opportunity, that back and forth as well as part of that conversation is going to be really, really helpful for them to get a better understanding regarding, is competition good?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And again, you have access to these conclusion pieces on the PowerPoint. So one thing that we haven't really talked about in the podcast is in the lesson plan template that all of our authors use, we ask them to consider extensions. How can you take this lesson to the next level? If you're working with students who are gifted and talented, what adjustments can you make to make the lesson relevant to them, et cetera, et cetera. So, Kymberli, you actually provide us with some notes about some of your extensions for your lesson plan. So before we get to our conclusion, can you talk a little bit more about some of those extensions that you discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned before, the episode is based on William Golding's Lord of the Flies. And so you may have that book available to you. Probably your English language arts department has that book available. They might even read that book. If they don't, they should. It's a really good, I think it's a really good kind of thinking into human behavior and what happens when groups are sort of put out in the wild, I guess. There's also a movie version of there's actually a couple of movie versions. The most recent one was from, I don't know, when I was a kid, like in the 80s. And I don't know if either version is really very good, but there are some good clips. You can find some good clips on YouTube to sort of illustrate some of the events that were in the Simpsons episodes. You can do like a compare and a contrast of the book or the movie to the TV episode. Also, elicit ideas from students because they're probably not familiar with Lord of the Flies. If they have never read the book, I'm sure they've never seen any of the movies. But you can ask them, what are some other movies or TV shows or books that they are familiar with that might show some examples of state of nature? So I threw a couple of examples into my extensions. Mad Max, which I wouldn't have thought is relevant, but with the newer Mad Max movies, those are a good example. The Avatar movies are another one. The Purge is one that they always come up with because even though that's an older film, they're all like, oh, it's like The Purge. And so that way you can at least kind of have something that is a little bit more relevant maybe to students. There's probably a lot more even, from streaming and different things like that your students will come up with. And you can kind of talk about how the ideas in those films or TV can help us to understand that idea of state of nature and how humans behave when there aren't any rules.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. And again, you will find extensions in each of the lesson plans. But like I said, this is kind of the first time we actually brought that to the podcast. So thank you so much, Kymberli, for adding that to the slide deck. So here we are. We're at the final. We want to know, according to you three, the experts about The Simpsons, how accurate is The Simpsons based on those topics that you selected? So we'll start with Tim first. So how accurate were your episodes based on these concepts of economics?
So I'll start with Mr. Plow. So looking at that, I would say it's 75% accurate. So the history part of it, the accuracy part of it, I think that they showed a really great representation of what do we mean by entrepreneurship? What do we mean by supply and demand? Really focusing on what is a service industry. There's really great examples in that episode of advertising and the power of advertising in slogans and trademarking and how those types of slogans really stick in people's minds, right? And that's a powerful part of advertising. So, but also really great example of monopolistic competition, right? And also there's in both episodes, there's some issues with ethics and talking about ethical dilemmas and ethical issues regarding running a business and what is healthy competition. So for Mr. Plow, that's the 75%. The Hollywood part of it is, and this is the same with Super Franchise Me, is there was an oversimplification of starting up a business, right? So in The Simpsons, they made it look like it was really easy to just start up a business. You just start it up tomorrow, right? And it didn't show what are the various barriers to starting a business. What is the legal components of it? What are the barriers to entry into a market? Also, too, they didn't really show the sustainability, right, of a business. They didn't really talk about that, and part of that deals with also what are the costs of it? What are the startup costs, the continuing costs, the capital investments? So, and it's one of those things where you can't fault the writers and producers of it, because there's only so much that you can fit in, and it's also supposed to be entertaining, right? So, but for Mr. Plow, 75% I think is pretty strong, right? So it wasn't as necessary regarding inaccuracies. It was like more of what they left out, what they did not show. With Super Franchise Me, I went with 60%. I went a little lower on that. Again, a really great representation regarding entrepreneurship, and what do we mean by a franchise, and also really great representation of the power imbalance between a franchisor and a franchisee.
Mhm.
Right, there's some information in that episode about contracts and fees and some of the limitations that's associated with being a franchisee. So also there's some labor issues. There was some where there's part of the episode where Marge has employees that they're terrible employees, right? They're filing their nails, they're doing all kinds of things. She has to get rid of all of them and then hires the kids, right? Which deals with some child labor issues. That's part of the Hollywood part of it. You just can't hire kids to fill in, right? So, but again, the Hollywood part of Super Franchise Me was again that oversimplification of starting up a business, right? So in that episode, the franchisor comes up to her and says, "Would you like to own one of these businesses?" Sure. And then the next scene, she has the franchise, right? So it seemed very, very simple, right? So there was no vetting of like who the franchisee was going to be, right? Also, too, the competition was another franchise location directly across the street, right? So no franchise is going to saturate the market where they're going to compete against each other like that, right? There was also some lack of showing uh, regarding the sudden success, right? So it really showed that she was really successful, like right away. That's not necessarily the case, right? In starting up a business, it takes some time to be able to start showing that level of success. So I scored Super Franchise Me a little lower than Mr. Plow on the accuracy, but it was, I would say, 60% accurate.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And again, for all of our economics teachers or those that teach economic concepts, never forget to tell your kids that if you want to become an entrepreneur, there are risk involved. And I think that's the key part of the definition of an entrepreneur, making sure that your kids know that there are certainly risk involved. Everyone who starts a business does not become successful. And in fact, sometimes you lose your shirt. So thank you very much, Tim, for bringing those up. Okay, Kymberli, you're on deck. You looked at this episode as far as accuracy when it comes to civic concepts. Can you tell us where you think your episode falls on that Hollywood or history continuum?
Sure. I don't really have like a percentage the way that Tim did. I kind of wished I did now though, because that sounded really smart. It's really difficult to determine though, especially when thinking about this idea of state of nature, because we don't have any example of what it would actually be like to live in a state of nature. It itself is kind of a hypothetical scenario, and it would be very, very unethical to take 20 kids and dump them off on a desert island and see what would happen. There actually was a reality show that tried to do that a little bit, and it was a little sketchy about the results that happened. But if we're thinking about how well does the show portray the ideas as the ideas are included in Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, I think it does a reasonably good job of doing that, because you have the weakest kid, you have Millhouse, really getting picked on pretty hard throughout the episode, being accused of things that he either did or didn't do. I won't spoil the episode if people haven't seen it. And then the kids kind of splitting into these two groups. We have Lisa taking on the role of trying to be a defense attorney, which I think suits her perfectly. And you do have these couple of different iterations of them trying to create a government and agreeing to the social contract to varying levels of success. So I would say it's probably, if I'm going to just pick a number out of the air, it's probably a good 65 to 70% accurate to the primary sources, because I think that William Golding did a really good job of reflecting that in Lord of the Flies originally. And then to be able to distill that down into, 15 minutes or whatever the content of the episode is, they did a pretty good job.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And again, it's interesting because in other episodes and all the work that I've reviewed in the book series, when we look at the Hollywood film, we're thinking Braveheart, we're thinking The Patriot, we're thinking the movie Brave, we're thinking, Apocalypto. All these films tend to be on the other side of the spectrum, more Hollywood, correct? Where it seems to be more inaccurate than accurate. So, Andy, I'm going to kind of frame a question to get you started. You can go wherever you want to with it. The two chapter authors, and I also agree because I wrote a chapter in the book as well, I found that the Simpsons tend to be more on the side of history, if you will, or more accurate about the concepts they're trying to display than maybe some of the Hollywood film that I've also looked at. You being the editor of this volume and working with all the authors and doing a lot of your own work yourself, what do you think? I mean, generally, do you think the Simpsons, when it comes to being a teaching tool and accuracy, do you think it tends to fall more towards the history piece than the Hollywood? What do you think?
I definitely think it tends to fall toward the accuracy, the history piece. Of course, like I think Tim and Kymberli had two very different takes on this, right? And so with Mr. Plow, I would 100% agree with this assessment, Tim. It's pretty accurate. It leaves out some things because it's a cartoon, but I can still sing the Mr. Plow jingle. I'm not going to do it right now, but you are correct. Like, it's stuck in my brain. I think forever. It's not coming out. And then, like, Kymberli, when you were talking about, the accuracy piece, it's satirizing, like that episode, Das Bus, is satirizing Lord of the Flies. So I think with good satire, you have to base it in accuracy and truth, and then heighten it from there. And that becomes the entertainment. And so some other movies can just go pure, entertainment, or kind of invent things. But satire has to be kind of rooted in that common experience that everybody. So if you've read Lord of the Flies, you have to get the references. So you have to be somewhat accurate to this book in order to get the satire from it. And that's something I think in general, The Simpsons does really well. And that's true when they take on historical topics. So one thing that these guys didn't mention was there's a chapter in the book that is a lesson about the episode Homer versus the 18th Amendment, which is about prohibition and how prohibition comes to Springfield. And then it basically from there is basically the whole story of like mimicking the US and their role, like their prohibition era, right? So you've got the beer barons and the organized crime and like an Elliot Ness type character who comes in to, bust up the speakeasies. And so it has to be rooted in accuracy so that people understand the joke of it. And I did that lesson with my secondary social studies methods students. And I wanted to add some primary sources that from different ones that were in the book. And I found a primary source of people filling up, so in the episode, Homer fills up bowling balls with liquor and then shuffles them through the bowling alley in order to like get the beer out to everybody. And we found a primary source of these women filling up giant, like it looked like leather basketballs. And I was like, oh my gosh, so surprise, surprise. Like this, I don't know if the writers of this looked at this, but it was so accurate. I couldn't believe it. Pretty close to accurate as far as the things Homer is doing. And of course, we all know about the Simpsons predicting the future, or thinking they can predict the future because they've been on for so long. They've seen so many things. So their accuracy gets better and better. And then when you look back at the older episodes, like you can say, oh my gosh, they predicted this or they called this because we have that reflection space for that too. So yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, a long way of saying I do think a lot of these Simpsons episodes are pretty accurate when it comes to these social studies topics. I also think that's why teachers use them a lot.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think again, I haven't really thought about that comparing your book to the other books, but definitely the Simpsons have kind of that more element. So so again, Hollywood history isn't to have kids prove, if you will, that every movie is inaccurate or every TV show is inaccurate. Again, in the future, we're going to do books about documentaries as well.
Mhm.
But I just think it's an interesting take that your book, most of the authors tend to think that their clips may be a little more accurate than perhaps your standard Hollywood film. And speaking of prohibition, one of my favorite scenes in the movie The Untouchables, you have these, agents who are basically trying to stop liquor from coming into the U.S. from Canada. A lot of barrels of whiskey get shot up, and whiskey's pouring out of said barrels, and you see them all get just a little tip, a little, a little tip of this whiskey, even though they're trying to stop it. And I'm sure that was probably pretty accurate as well, but we have to find the primary and secondary sources to determine if that's the case. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And again, for the audience and the listeners in the PowerPoint, we have references for both lessons. So a good reference material list that you can use again if you want to replicate this these lessons in your own classroom. But now we're up to our time to do some promotion. So, Annie, do you have anything you'd like to promote for the audience about your upcoming work?
Yeah, so along these same lines, even though these are not related topics to The Simpsons, they are related in a sense that what I kind of have taken on in my research is trying to find practical instructional tools for teachers to teach elementary level social studies. So I have two books. They're pretty different, but they're all along those same lines. Two other books besides this Hollywood or history volume. Place-based social studies education, learning from Flint, Michigan, talks about ways to bring place-based education into your classroom. And then I have a book with my colleague Christy Bruger called Inquiry by the Book: Teaching Historical Fiction with the Inquiry Design Model. So this one actually is more similar because we take very popular historical fiction texts that are often used in elementary classrooms, and we assume they need some boosting with the accuracy. So we kind of give ideas on how to provide that for elementary teachers. And then I will say right now I'm working on a companion website to the Hollywood or History Simpsons volume where you could actually click on the links that are featured in the book. So you can't get the lessons, you got to buy the book for that. But it will, if you've already bought the book, you can go to this companion website and actually, click on uh, Tim and Kymberli's graphic organizers that are copyable that you make a copy of from Google Docs and use in your own classroom. Or you can go directly to a link to the 1,000-word philosophy that Kymberli has in her lesson, and go right there and have it ready for you. So working on that. Hopefully that will be out soon.
And yeah, that's great, Annie. And if you get that ready, I will put the links on all the socials for Hollywood History Podcast, as well as the Facebook page for Hollywood History Podcast. Because I know Tim and Jesus, prior guests, did the same thing with their upcoming book about Latinx history in the series. So that's
Okay.
great. And audience, really, I don't know if Annie knows this, but she is my silent competition partner. Whenever I see she publishes something like a book, I'm like, dang it, I got to publish another book. Keep up with Annie Whitlock. So that's just how it works here in the world of academic writing and such. So thank you, Annie. Congratulations on your hard work
Well,
and
you're
also,
way ahead of me as far as books being
but,
published,
well, there you
Dr.
go.
Roberts.
And also, would you like to promote your podcast? Because I think it's a very
Oh,
interesting concept, and we talked a lot about it in a conference last week.
that's true. I have a podcast called Letters Home, and it's a social studies related local history podcast where we read letters from a World War II soldier that from my hometown, who is my grandfather. So, and we talk about family history, local history, Michigan history, global history with World War II, and going to be in the coming years here working on, of course, educational materials to go with it so that teachers can actually bring that into their classrooms as well. But yeah, I'm a podcast host as well as a guest. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all your usual platforms.
Yeah, definitely download Hollywood History Podcast and then download Letters Home Podcast back to back. But
Yeah.
there is a link, I believe, in the PowerPoint, so you can access.
Yes, there's a link to our Spotify, I believe. If you haven't gotten enough of my voice on
Yeah,
this
well,
episode, you can keep it going.
I feel the same way about this podcast. So great. Well, thanks so much, Annie. And Tim, you also have some things to promote. Can you talk about what you've been doing?
Yes, I don't have a podcast or all these books that have been published, but I recently had a book chapter that I wrote that was just recently published. Completely different what we're talking about regarding the Simpsons and in Hollywood or history, but one of my areas of research and passion is trauma-informed instructional practices, because I've spent most of my career as an educator, as a teacher and administrator, working with students with significant levels of trauma, and that's led to a barrier in their education. So there was a call for book chapters a couple years ago, and that book was finally just published. And it's called Developing Trauma-Informed Teachers: Intentional Partnerships to create classrooms that foster equity, resilience, and asset-based approaches. So it's a series, and so I'm really excited that finally was just recently published. Another passion of mine is teaching media literacy, and so in the Great Lakes Social Studies Journal, and this has been about a year old now, I wrote an article on the collective responsibility and inquiry approach to teaching media literacy and the importance of teaching media literacy. So, please take a look at that. And then I had mentioned earlier about being the chair of the Michigan Social Studies Olympiad. So, Michigan educators, please consider participating in the Michigan Social Studies Olympiad. And to get more information about that, see the Michigan Council for the Social Studies website.
Great. And that is such hard work. And you've done such an amazing job with the Olympiad since you've taken over that responsibility. And, if your judges actually judge stuff, then you'll be even better. But that's a story for another day on the podcast. But yeah, so that's awesome. Annie, real quick, before we get to Kymberli, can you talk a little bit more about the Great Lakes Social Studies Journal? Is that just a journal for Michigan social studies educators, or can anyone in the world submit things to that wonderful journal?
It is definitely not just for Michigan educators. So the Great Lakes Social Studies Journal that Tim mentioned is a publication. It is through the Michigan Council for the Social Studies because it's our board at the moment, anyway, that are the current editors of it. But we take submissions of research articles, descriptions of lesson plans, narratives of different like professional development or like voices from the classroom, and publish them in an online only journal twice a year. So yeah, that's it's a really great publication put on through our board and edited by the amazing Linda Dornbos. And pretty soon we're going to make it more of a collaborative effort, but with other state councils. But we have submissions and authors and readers that are far beyond Michigan.
Excellent. And again, if you have any thing you would like to submit, practitioner focused, but research focused as well, please do. My part in that journal is I actually review the APA. So if you find any APA mistakes, that's my fault, because I've read these many times looking for APA errors and trying to fix those. So
write another Simpsons lesson, submit it to the journal.
There you go. Exactly. Or any Hollywood or history lesson.
Any Hollywood or history lesson.
Either Great Lakes Journal or for any upcoming books in the series. So Kymberli, you're a classroom teacher, and I hope that what you're doing is taking a break, and enjoying your summer. But
He's not.
No more trade papers, that kind of thing. But I think you're at a conference right now. Is that correct?
I am. I'm actually sitting in a like little recording booth at the Zeckelman Holocaust Center in Farmington Hills. I am attending a Tolley seminar this week with the Olga Lengel Institute, learning about Holocaust history. And this is the third thing that I've been to since school has gotten out, and have a few more. So the only thing I'm promoting right now is myself. If anybody wants to send me money for travel, I would be happy for that. Although many of the things that I choose to go to in the summer are applied. You have to apply for it, and they do offer pretty substantial stipends, hotel, just about everything for this one was covered. I had to get myself to Southeast Michigan and pay for a couple of dinners. But other than that, so really, I would just encourage any educators that are watching this, especially social studies educators. There are so many great opportunities that are out there for educational travel for teachers in the summertime. You do have to be willing to give up a week or two of your summer to do that, but you make great connections with other educators that are just as passionate as you are, which is a really, really good resource. And you really get to go to some great places and learn some great things. We got to go to Temple Beth El yesterday, which is the oldest Jewish congregation in the state of Michigan, originally founded in 1850. So they are celebrating their 175th anniversary here, starting in a couple of weeks. And we got to speak to one of the rabbis there and get a tour of the temple and all of their collections. And we've been through the museum here at the Zeckelman Holocaust Center once, and are going to have I think one more tour before we're finished. And we're going to sort of culminate with a survivor speaker that's coming on Friday, a woman by the name of Irene Miller. And she actually travels and comes to school. She came to my school a couple of years ago, but I'm excited to hear from her again.
That's great. And yeah, teachers, I mean, there's so many opportunities out there for you to get funding to do these type of things, these professional developments. So we definitely encourage you. When I was a classroom teacher, I did the same thing. Most of my summers, I was out somewhere in Georgia on a bus learning about, Georgia studies. So it's definitely out there for you. And yeah, take a break, enjoy your time off. But, there's always PD out there for you as well. And again, I know anyone who's listening to this podcast is going to be a passionate social studies teacher. So definitely look into some of these important PDs that are out there. So great. Well, thank you all so much. I will say, I'll speak for the panel here. If you do have any questions for myself or any of the guests, please email us at hollywoodorhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Once again, any questions for any of the guests, please email us at hollywoodorhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Annie, Tim, Kymberli, I know this seems like a MCSS board meeting, but thank you so much for showing up today and really discussing all your great ideas about this wonderful book about the Simpsons. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Just to let you know, this was the final episode of the Hollywood History Podcast. I would like to thank a lot of people for helping to get this podcast off the ground. First, I would like to thank my department for their generous grant to fund these 11 episodes. I would also like to thank Alex, Phil, Marianne, and the rest of the team from the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Support at CMU for all their hard work on the podcast. But most importantly, I would like to thank the listeners. Thank you so much for listening and watching the podcast. And we really don't know what we're going to do in the future. We hope to make more content for you all concerning Hollywood history or maybe some other educational topics. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and share this with anyone you think would be interested in bringing the Hollywood history strategy to their classroom. Thanks so much for listening. I hope to talk to you all in the future. Hollywood history volumes are now published by Emerald Publishing out of the UK. All volumes can be purchased on Emerald's website or anywhere books are sold. If the innovative ideas discussed in the podcast have led you or a family member to consider earning an undergraduate or graduate degree in education from Central Michigan University, we encourage you to review the links in the show notes or contact host Dr. Scott Roberts at rober4s@cmich.edu. We offer undergraduate degrees in general and special education at the elementary level, secondary disciplines including social studies, and graduate degrees in curriculum and instruction, instructional technology, literacy, health and PE, and special education. We also have accelerated teacher certification programs for those with undergraduate degrees in something other than education who want to become excellent teachers in the state of Michigan.